What went well at Frontier and that exit there, and then what we're working on now. We talk a lot about books, and one of the books that had helped kind of shape this was one of the just basic things we start with. It's nothing that's in a book.
Welcome back to the Raw Selection Private Equity Podcast. Here is another Playbook series and a returning guest of Tim O'Reilly, a proven private equity-backed CFO, but is now a chief executive officer. He'll talk to us about making that shift, but our main focus today is all about building an intentional strategy to drive a business to an exit. From an individual who's done that now multiple times and is now going for that billion-dollar value exit experience. So without further ado, thank you very much, Tim. So Tim, welcome back to the podcast. For anybody that hasn't already checked out Tim's podcast, it's one of our, I think, top 5 podcasts for downloads in the entire history of the Private Equity Podcast. So please do check that out, and you'll learn all about Tim prior to his just completed his most recent exit and taking on his next step in his career as a full chief executive to grow business. So we're going to hear a bit about this, but this is all going to be focused around building an intentional strategy for your buy and build platform. So Tim, kick us off. Give us an insight. How do we go about building that intentional strategy?
Hey, Alex, great to be back again. Really appreciate it, and look forward to sharing some more insights and hopefully helpful and not harmful.
Pleasure's all ours, Tim.
Tim O'Reilly, CEO for Guild Garage Group. We're working to build the industry-leading platform for garage door service and install companies across the U.S. And happy to join you again, Alex. I think for us, we went through, at my last position with Frontier Service Partners, we went through this evolution of a strategy that won really big for us in an exit, partnered with some fantastic people on the back end and the strategic partner on the back end, and got to celebrate that. But post-transaction, we were able to sit back and reflect on what really did work for us and what added that extra value that our investors or the next set of investors saw valuable in the platform that they could use, they could take, they can mold, and they can continue on with our strategy. So, today, I think, with Guild, we were able to create a platform and a strategy that was very intentional on making sure we put those core pillars in place before we get started. So excited to share that with everyone. Excited to talk about, what went well at Frontier and that exit there. And then what we're working on now to make sure that Guild is successful for not only our financial sponsors today, but future financial sponsors.
Perfect. So what you talked about that learning, you talked about an intentionality. What were the things that you looked at and when I wish we did this intentionally and it wasn't just the stars aligned?
Yeah. Oh, great question. So I think, looking back at Frontier, as we're putting together our management presentation and about to sit in front of a number of investors that are looking to look at our business and pay a lot of money for our business, it was circling, you have the inputs, all the financial inputs, they turn into financial outputs, and then you've got to explain why were those financial outputs great for us and how are they sustainable for us. And when you boil it down, it comes down to, all of the core pieces of running a business that you don't think about daily, but are happening daily. And that came down to making sure we had the right focus from a leadership perspective. Everyone was we used the analogy of sitting in a boat, right? And we're all rowing towards the same shore. You've got to make sure all your leaders are sitting on the same side of the boat as you and rowing in the same direction. And you're going to have people throughout the organization that are going to either be rowing in the same direction as you in day one. They may jump out of the boat. You may have to throw them out of the boat, which is not always great. Or you do what I think is the intentional strategy, which is being very clear with communication and the North Star and where the shore is, that you get people to get excited about turning around in the boat and row in the same direction. And so that obviously starts with the leader. I wasn't in crew when I was in high school, but I had a lot of friends who were in crew. And we talk about the coxswain who basically makes is the leader in the boat, telling you where to row, how fast to row, and directionally giving you where you're supposed to be headed. So we were very intentional. I think it's being very intentional about setting that leadership up for success with the right tools and resources and training, and then cascading from there, having a really good employee experience, which turns into a great customer experience. Hopefully that customer experience is rewarding you with brand loyalty, long-term relationships, and then eventually referrals to new relationships. And then that all feeds the output of this really fantastic financial result, which is growth in EBITDA, growth in revenue. And so Frontier, it all came together when we boiled down the ocean to say, how did we get to this success? And for us, it was within 2 years, we had an enormous amount of success. One of our starting branches, they had an 87% growth rate in revenue, 387% growth in EBITDA. And that doesn't just happen, right? So you have to boil that down. What did we do well? It started with the leadership team. It's funny, the owner there, Henry Haley, had formed a leadership team, folks that he knew he wanted to grow into leaders, and he called it the Justice League. So every week we met with the Justice League, and his business evolved through the growth of leaders and them adopting a mindset of leadership, and it created great employee experiences, which drove training, development of those employees, career paths for those employees. And that then in turn created this really fantastic customer experience where average ticket prices were up, volume was up, more business coming in through referrals than they ever had. Membership increases. So folks that were selecting and wanting to have a long-term relationship with our brand, and have us come back out to their house more than once a year, right? All of that then turned into, okay, having fantastic EBITDA growth, fantastic revenue growth, and everyone kind of in that boat rowing the same direction. It was a great example of how that all comes together. So in essence, I think bridging all of those things that we did well from Frontier perspective that were maybe indirectly we got to those results just by all of the leaders kind of thinking that way. How do you take that blueprint of what worked well and be more intentional about it in your next build? So I'll pause there.
I just want to jump into the customer service before we jump into the intentionality around what you would do or what you're doing now. So if I speak to a lot of CXOs and they are like, yeah, they can set things for themselves, but then when it comes down to a 500, 1,000, 100 people organization, it can be very difficult. And they may only have 5 or 6 salespeople on the road that actually meet with customers. You have all of your salespeople, then your engineers that then go on site, and everybody that needs to be on that same mantra, that same process, and getting the buy-in, because all you need is one miserable engineer that comes around and walks in with his muddy boots and just is an absolute arse, then that customer's probably going to go somewhere else. So how did you go about, I suppose it comes down to culture, but how did you go about building that, not only just with the leadership team, but then flooding that down the business to every engineer with his toolkit walking onto what isn't a site, which is a customer's home?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think you said our favorite word, which is consistency, right? And so the only way you get to consistency is showing up every day and making sure that your daily habits turn into weekly habits, turn into you're winning the month, turns into you're winning the quarter, and then you win the year. And I think for us, we knew that we needed to develop some sort of consistency or some sort of toolkit and checklist that created those daily habits. And so the daily habits were then reported on a weekly basis. And it maybe sounds excessive, but we had our weekly leadership meetings to make sure that like everyone was on the right page, right? It created that our second favorite word, which is accountability. And so it wasn't accountability from the sake of, hey, you need to do this. This is something that I want you to do. It was these leadership meetings formed their kind of own culture where it was like, I am taking responsibility for what I said I wanted to do. And a lot of it was more so asking for help on how to continue moving that consistency across the organization, and how to get to the right resources to make sure that my technicians that I'm leading, that they're armed with all of the resources, all of the training materials that they can possibly get their hands on to create that unique customer experience. And then also reporting on, hey, here's some things that didn't go well in the field, and how do we get better from there. So I love, there's we talk a lot about books, and one of the books that had helped kind of shape this was a book called Atomic Habits from James Clear. And it's a great book of showing you how, um, you know, habits will always win, good or bad. And if we can focus on being intentional with our daily habits, they and setting up the right habits, the right systems, you're going to hit your goals. And for these leaders, they had a lot of, we indirectly, again, we weren't intentional, but indirectly, we were feeding them habits on a weekly basis that they could carry out daily in their actions with their employees, with their customers, that would yield this success, this great customer experience. And then they were sharing those best practices across all of the brands that we owned. So that was outside of consistency, being accountable, it was sharing the best practices, right? And saying, hey, this really worked for us. It's worked really well for us. We've been at it for 90 days. There's a new group coming into the fold. Hey, you guys have gotten great traction with your membership counts. How are you getting such high membership counts? Well, here's what we're doing. So it was kind of, if I had to boil it down to three things, it was we were consistent. We always kept our meetings. Even if someone had to miss for something, we always touch base with them. We sent meeting notes out. We held ourselves accountable, and then we shared best practices, what worked well for us. So boiling it all down, I think it's much easier said than done. But it's all in those interactions on a daily, weekly basis that form that. So you just got to be clear with yourself on what you're doing. And we didn't know it while we were going through it, but we had formed that strategy, which worked well for us.
Like it. So we were about to talk about the intentionality. So you mentioned about the customer service, the leadership team, and everything else. And then what are we taking into your next gig now as chief exec that, albeit it obviously happened previously, but now intentionally, the strategy?
Yeah, and so for us at Guild Garage Group, we're supported by four amazing family offices, financial sponsors, and it starts there. It's having the right mindset from an investor perspective, where they feel very passionate about the strategy. They feel passionate about how intentional we are with the direction we're going. Fortunate enough that I've got three amazing partners that I'm working with that are in the trenches with me: Jordan Dubin, Joe Delaney, and Sean Slazik, who has been just absolute forces for us to make sure that these strategies we have, that we can approach it with the intentionality that we need to in order to make it successful. So we've got our North Star is a financial North Star. It's an exit that hopefully ends with a B, so I can join the ranks of Adam Coffee, right? But that requires the intentionality. It requires being very diligent in the way that we lay out our strategy. So, most of these, back by build platforms starts out with a financial input. Here's all the financial inputs that you have to work with, and here's a desired financial output, base case exit strategy for accomplishing the mission. And we wanted to take that a step further, which was, how do we create a platform that outlives our financial partners, maybe even outlives us, right? And it was it needed to be sustainable, and it needed to be focused on the right pillars within business outside of financial, right? Financial, and just kind of pull that back into that atomic habits, right? Financials are results. They're the end goal, right? They end, and then there's another goal that's set. The financials are not the habits, right? There's habits within, managing finance that, helps make sure you achieve those goals, but they're not the core habits of a business that get you to those results. And so, most back buy build strategies, and I was, I'm guilty of this too, is like, first thing you think is, oh, I need to get a CFO involved, right? Because everything is so financially focused. And fortunate enough, again, to have great partners that we met with. We've had conversations at that point in time. We had conversations with over a dozen business owners and operators, and we always asked them, if you had three wishes, if I was the guild genie and I popped out of a lamp and you had three wishes for your business, what would you focus on? What would you want to use those wishes on? And without fail, every one of the operators said either some version of training and development or onboarding and recruiting. So not one of them said grow EBITDA dollars. Not one of them said I need accounting help or finance help, right? So being intentional is knowing kind of where you're needed. And so again, blessed with great partners, we developed the strategy of investors that have a passion for developing leaders, and we have great owners and operators that we partner with. They're the starting leaders of our brand. We all do like these corporate jerseys, and then hand out branch level jerseys, and our corporate jerseys say 0-0 on them because we don't have a business without these owners, operators. And every acquisition that we do, they add a number to brands to our platform, another best practice leader joining their guild. But we start with those owners and operators, and we develop a leadership team around them and their brands and their branches and their markets. And it's dedicated to making sure that they've got the tools and resources, and even just the right books to read, the right mentality to have coming into work, to be able to support the next wave of leaders, because they know by now, if they've partnered with us or they've had conversations with us, that the next wave of growth for them is really dependent upon developing new leaders, developing new GMs that can open up new site locations, new markets, or we buy a brand that's going to talk into their brand, and that they need someone who's going to be a leader that steps up and runs that market for them. So gotten that built in. Our first hire was a VP of training and development, Kelsey Gassman, who joined us from a long career with GoDaddy, with Toyota brands. Just recently had helped a startup HRIS system. So fantastic knowledge base to basically bring in the right type of leadership training for us. And then after the leadership training, really focus on that employee experience and the employee training. So that whole life cycle, moving in from leadership development to being intentional about how our employee experience is. And Richard Brand has said this for years, but it's something that that I believe is true, is you create really healthy, happy employees that are supported from all the things. You're investing your time on employees, you're investing your treasure, your money that direction, and you focused your talent there, which is getting folks like Kelsey on the team. You're going to create a workplace and a culture that has the consistency, the accountability. They feel invested in. They're excited to come into work most days, and that creates a healthy environment from the time that you've gone through the recruiting stage to the time that hopefully you've retired with us, which is fantastic. We've been with you through that entire life cycle, and we've set up the programs to make sure you're successful in your entire career path. It may be that your career is, I only want to install garage doors for the rest of my life. That's what I want to do. I'm passionate about that. I'm really good at that. Well, we're going to make you the best at that. We're going to make sure you have all the updated training and everything to make sure that you love what you're doing. And then if something changes, we've got career paths lined up to make sure that, we're able to adapt with your career as well, and help you grow. So leadership development, investors that are focused on leaders that are focused on creating really great, unique employee experiences that then drive employees that are dedicated to creating great customer experience. And so being a healthy, well-trained employee that has all the tools and resources at their disposal to create a great customer experience is going, or to impact a customer's experience, drives that brand loyalty, drives those long-term relationships. They're going to be more, they're going to be positioned better to find out and fine tune where in the customer experience there's something that maybe doesn't feel right or is not going right. And that's going to help evolve the whole customer experience and the employees training and the leadership training. So it creates that more intentional customer experience where employees are gathering that feedback, they're utilizing their tools and resources out in the field. And then we're hopeful that by taking a really intentional focus on customer experience, we're going to be rewarded with memberships, lifetime memberships, where folks are asking us to come back into their home once or twice a year to service their garage door. You've got your garage guy or your garage girl, right? I know who's coming to my house. He or she's been helping me for years, just make sure everything's working well. It's not noisy above my kids or below my kids' room, right? So we've got a garage door at our house that just every time it opens, my daughter wakes up. She's 3, and so we're just like, if we could get the door right fixed, right? So creating that that relationship, long-term relationship with that customer will hopefully lead into a brand loyalty within that market, and then potentially referrals to new business, new customers in their neighborhood or across their family or friend groups, and that we get a chance to replicate that experience with others. So all of that, if we do all that really well, we do believe that, and there's other things like the last podcast that we did together, the last show we did together, it was really focused on how do you optimize cost structure within the business. That's really important. But I would say it's probably secondary to getting all these big pieces, all these core principles down. You could cut all the costs out of the business you want, but if you don't have an engine that helps you promote growth, you're still going to fall. You're still going to get stagnant. And so I think one of the big learning lessons is having that approach, getting to that point where you understand that some of these other core pillars of inputs within the business result in even, it's exponential versus linear growth. And I think we feel like we've by being intentional, we'll unlock the exponential growth of these businesses that we're partnering with.
I like it.
Sorry to interrupt. Just a quick mention of our long-standing partnership with Grata. As you will probably know, the private equity scene is constantly evolving, and deal flow is moving now to proprietary and data-driven processes. Grata provides you with the data and information of over 7 million private companies. So if you're looking to improve your proprietary deal flow and improve the data access, then reach out to Grata today. Now back to the podcast.
So if we just delve a little bit deeper into some of those aspects, one of those things you said, you create a development plan for leaders, an area that's usually forsaken for development plan for underperformers or something in the business where we focus on that, but it looks like development plan for everybody. What specifically have you put together for not the ins and outs of it, but what specifically have you actually put together for the leaders? What development plan? What are you training? What are you developing them with your new appointment of VP of training?
Yeah, great question. I think where it all starts is with the leaders, and you have various opinions on that, right? It's culture's from the bottoms up, or culture set from the top down. I think it's a blend. I think we've been in business long enough to know that it's a blend of both, and the leadership development really has an influence on whether or not you're geared up in the right mindset to help someone or not. So one of the just basic things we start with, it's nothing that's in a book. It's nothing that you don't have, like a reader's club or anything like that yet, but something very basic is just understanding the leaders in our organization, what are their personal goals? And it sounds, maybe it's taboo from an HR perspective, but what are the personal objectives that they're trying to get to on a daily basis? We call it the oxygen goal, right? Is if you're in an airplane and oxygen masks fall down, the reason they tell you to put your oxygen mask on first is because you can't help others if you're passed out in the seat, right? Because you didn't put your oxygen mask on. And so we start there first. We want to understand, like, what is the oxygen for this leader? What do they need to do in their personal lives in order to feel invigorated and have enough oxygen to go and put oxygen masks on other people and develop other either leaders within the company or other employees within the company. And so it starts with that. I've got actually, where is it? I've got a book here that I've got every single leader in our organization is in this book. And we tab it out and we go through before we even start. Hey, where are your work goals? I know exactly where you're at on your personal goals, because I know whether or not we're going to have to pivot and make sure you've gotten your oxygen mask on first before we start helping the rest of the organization and diving down into those work goals. So it starts with that, being intentional about who the leader is as a person, making sure that their passions outside of work are being met, so that when they're in work, and I heard this from Rob Dyrdek, right? One of the things he did was break down his time into eights. So he lives by the triple eights, and 8 hours for sleep and health, 8 hours for family, 8 hours for work. And he got so much, grief about the 8 hours, only working 8 hours for work. Right. And we all fall victim to this, right? There just doesn't seem to be enough time in the day. But when he was really intentional about being in work for those 8 hours and being intentional about his schedule and what he filled in those 8 hours, you realize you have a lot more in those 8 hours than you even imagined. And so part of that is really making sure that personally, in their health, their fitness, their mental health, all of that's really good before we get them blocking and tackling on growing other people and growing the organization. So once we get that kind of basic principle down of being passionate about what they're passionate about outside of work, then it moves really quickly into, okay, how do we make sure you're a great leader, right? How do you take some of these core principles of leadership and that's where we get into understanding strengths, doing strength assessments. We'll do Strength Finders 2.0 for all of our leaders, so we understand, personally for me, to understand where are our leaders' strengths. We'll do, I'm a fan of Myers-Briggs, not just because it helps you understand where people fit on a more general basis, but it also helps you understand like how they'll work with each other. Right. So when you're going through a lot of best practice sharing, it's understanding like, okay, who do I want kind of to sit at the table with each other? Because I do believe iron sharpens iron. And you may be able to get folks that maybe think very differently to get together and then open up perspective. So, I do think, outside of that, it's that consistency again. It's just having a constant drip of training, leadership training that's coming in. And that, I think, in my mind, is more important than just having, one leadership event every year that you go and you do training, you come back, everybody feels refreshed for that first month or two. And then all of a sudden those skills start to deplete until you get back to the next year. And it's just not consistent enough to where you're going to get the results. So part of our training program too is to just make sure we get that constant drip of leadership training coming in. So again, forming those daily habits that form the week, form the month, form the quarter, form the year.
Yeah, it's interesting. The goals thing, we do exactly the same. Everyone in the business, we all have it documented. We review it with the managers every week, and then with me personally with every month across everyone in the business. And I think it's a really good way of tying people in. You mentioned about the leadership. So you mentioned doing some leadership assessment tools using Myers-Briggs or DISC or whatever to give assessment and give awareness to both the people. I think it's Patrick Len Shoney, if I do his pronunciation correctly, he talks a lot about one of the books, I think Ideal Team Player, I can't remember. One of his books, he talks about learning and getting insight into every single person in the leadership team to build them together. With regards to specific training, so you mentioned doing like drip feeding. Are you doing like a model like, we've implemented this new model, whether it be hungry, humble, smart type model, or an ice hop model, or a situational leadership model? What are you actually dripping feeding into your leaders?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for us right now, it's evolving, right? So I think leadership training, and in my opinion, I think it's got to evolve with where you're at in a business. So some of this will be, curated for events that are happening within the business. So if there's an overall theme in the business, right, where it's, hey, maybe it's cultural, maybe it's getting my entire team to get to a mindset shift on how we go about approaching the organization. And I don't know how to do that effectively. We may start to launch into our drip campaign core principles from 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. How do you get that paradigm shift? How do you get people to, start with the end in mind? All of those different things that are going to start to help them with their coaching ability down to the next, layer of management, and then ultimately make sure that they're in a position to help their team the best, right? So we may have things where, boiled across we'll take everything from the entire organization up, and we say, hey, we need some resources on sales training and how to effectively lead our sales team. And we may start to pull from books that talk about what are good sales practices, and start to drip those through too. So to be honest with you, I think it's a ever changing thing. It's getting a consistent drip of what is needed in the moment, or what do you are envisioning or forecasting you're going to need, right? If I know, like, we've got a few businesses that I know summers are going to be really big revenue pace months that they're going to have to get over some big hurdles, right?
Mm-hmm.
I may start my leadership training on coaching. How do you lead people past big hurdles, right? How do you get people excited about offering more when you're in a customer's home if that feels uncomfortable? How do you encourage and keep people motivated when you're up against like really tough targets? So a lot of the leadership training is still, I would say, in essence, we're in like a discovery phase of that's forming. Some of the basic blocking and tackling we're working through right now. But I think you've got to have a plan that evolves with your business. Either addresses things that hey, I've been looking in the rearview mirror quite often, and that seems to be something that we need to address, or forward looking, I know something big's coming up. We're going to have to get over that hurdle, right? It could be you have a big onboarding class coming up too, right? So, hey, I've got a big wave of onboarding, new employees. This may be the time to make sure that like we revisit on the leadership front how to manage new employees, make sure that they're set up for success, go through those things too. So again, being intentional with how you set up those programs and what you're working on. But I'll tell you, the ones we've committed to right off the bat has been strength finders. I think it's really important. Kelsey Gassman, who's fantastic, she would produce so much value for folks that listen to your show. Expert on training, but one of the things that I've learned from her is working on strengths-based leadership, strengths-based coaching. And so we focused in on this book to really understand, like, play to everyone's strengths, and then understand where wherever you do have gaps in strengths, we've got best practices across multiple organizations. We could find someone to help support you in other areas, but play to their strengths. That's where you're going to get the most amount of value. That's where they're going to be most passionate. And so it's really important for us to understand, where's everybody at, where are their strengths at, and then to get to a point where we're looking at those strengths more than just once every 10 years, right? So strengths change, people evolve, and even though your core may be the same, your you may have developed new strengths along the way. You may have a strength that's outweighed another strength. And so understanding kind of like where everyone's at, not that we would do it every year, but maybe once or twice a year, going back and revisiting that assessment just to make sure we know where everyone's at. And then the Myers-Briggs is really good. We've committed to doing that as well. It just gives a really good sense for how leaders could potentially interact with each other and how to interact with your leadership team. So like for the owners and operators that run these brands, selecting a leadership team is a difficult thing, right? Because you want to make sure you're growing the right people. But then after you've selected them, really understanding like where do their strengths lie. I may not give someone who is really, and this is not a strength, but I'm just using it as an example, but may not give someone who's who's not very organized. They don't have organization as part of their strengths. Here's a whole bunch of things that I need you to go and apply some structure to, right? I may shift that and put that with someone who's got organization as a strength. So right now, again, very discovery phase with our leadership programs, very intentional about what we're trying to get to. And I think 7 habits is one that we'll start off with pretty quickly, is distilling down maybe core principles within that 7 habits. So that way we've got leaderships that are kind of moving from the same mindset.
So Raw Selection is built on completing the difficult searches, the searches that the big strat firms have struggled with, and we've built our track record and our basis on working with lower and middle market private equity firms across Europe and North America on the searches for the firm and for the portfolio companies that other firms have been incapable of completing. So if you're exploring a new opportunity, either within a private equity firm or a portfolio C-suite executive in a peer-backed setting, please do reach out to us at Raw Selection. We'd love to support you in securing your next role within the private equity industry. Alongside the podcast, we're passionate about giving back to the industry and giving people information that they can run and utilize. One thing we do regularly every year is we run salary reports on accurate and live data of people that we've interviewed and people that have shared their information with us. So if you're looking to compare your current compensation or your compensation for your next hire in your private equity firm or portfolio company, then please check out our YouTube channel and see the playlist of salary surveys.
Like it. The interesting question for you, Adam. So, Adam Coffee on the mind. So you've made the progression from chief financial officer to now CEO. What advice would you give to other people, whether it be COO, whatever, to get into that, top seat?
Yeah, great question. I think it is hard it's not easy to make a leap from a CFO to a CEO position. And I think part of it is just demonstrating that you want to be involved in operations. I think one of the benefits I had of working and partnering with Imperial Capital, Eugene and folks from that investment team was that they gave me the opportunity. And I had mentioned when I was interviewing that I wanted to get more intimate with operations, with the leadership teams, and be involved in those conversations, sit in those rooms outside of just financial. I think it helped me become a better CFO. I was able to help drive the organization from a financial perspective in a way that I wouldn't have been if I weren't sitting in those operations meetings, marketing, customer service, all those, right? So I think it's being intentional about really learning every aspect of the business. I would say for operation officers, COOs looking to make the leap to CEO, I would say, the other direction, right? A COO, you've got a lot of exposure to operations, how the leadership teams work. You're armed with probably 80% of how a business works. You've got to learn that next 20%, which is how do you convert that to financial success and really understanding the financial pieces. So I think someone who can blend all of those together, right? Strategy, knowing how the operations work, knowing all of the different functional areas within a business that you can impact through operations, and then pulling together the financial portion of that and being able to speak that language that all three of those have to come together in order to make sure that you're a successful CEO, in my opinion. And again, I'm new, but I've read a lot of Adam Coffey's books. Speaking of Adam, and have benefited from just indirect mentorship from him on what it takes to be a CEO and how you have to look at a business through multiple lenses, not just one. And so anyone who's looking to make that leap, you start now, right? You don't need to wait for someone to give you the CEO title to start forming your mindset and your schedule and everything to be passionate about getting involved in that and operating like a CEO. So again, you don't want to step on toes, but be intentional about being in the meetings that you want to learn more about. And I think, work through every area of the business, try to understand how each area works. And form, you don't have to be an expert in everyone. I'm certainly not an expert in every field of business, but I do know enough, and I've educated myself enough to know how to coach those areas, how to get the best out of those areas, and to know what great looks like. So read. I think you'll hear Adam Coffey say it. You'll hear folks like Grant Cardone say it. You'll hear all these people who have reached great success in their careers. They've done that through reading. They've done that through going to conferences and learning more. They've gone through mentorship programs. Can't stress that enough. And lean on your relationships. You may not be a CEO now, but guarantee you've probably got a CEO close by. Lean on those mentorships. I was fortunate enough to have CEOs that mentored me to get here too. And they're going to tell you, hey, here's the things you need to know outside of being a financial officer, right? There's more than debits and credits to this business, right? So it's absolutely a fantastic leap. I've loved every minute of it so far. And I think it's probably the most rewarding position that you can have in an organization, but it's also one that has the greatest responsibility. So, be prepared for sleepless nights. I think being an entrepreneur, being a CEO are very similar if you're doing it right. You're constantly going to be waking up. I keep a notepad next to my desk and next to my nightstand with things that I jolted awake and saying, hey, I need to write this down because this is good. I want to keep that and share that. So, but yeah, so I make the leap, get involved now. Don't wait. Get that education now while you're not, I don't know if it was Adam or someone else had mentioned this to me in my mentorship with them, but it's do these things in a low stake environment before you get into the high stake environment, right? So once you're in the CEO seat, high stake environment, right? You got to make sure you're executing. You got to make sure you're ready for it. When you're sitting in the CFO seat, learning how from a CEO, lower stakes, opportunities to learn, opportunities to get involved, lower stake environment because you've got a CEO to lean on. So would encourage you to do it before you get the title, and then it'll feel easy once you get the title.
More exposure, more immersion to these things certainly helps. Well,
right.
Tim, thank you very much for sharing everything you have. Your second time on the podcast, and huge amounts of value dropped here again. So if anybody does wish to reach out to you post this, how best do they get in touch, please?
Yeah, perfect. My email address is a long one. It's tim.o'reilly@guildgaragegroup.com. And you can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, you name it, I'm on it. But I've been so fortunate and blessed that past listeners of the podcast have reached out and asked for help. I'm happy to help in any way I can.
That's very kind of you. So, well, thank you very much for coming on. Thank you very much for sharing into the insights of your exit, what you've learned, and the intentionality of what you're doing currently with your big growth project and taking a business from basically zero to getting it to $1 billion value exit value, hopefully. And I'm sure, Tim, with the energy and everything you bring just to the podcast, I'm sure and confident you'll receive that. So thank you very much for coming on again.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate it. And if I can help you in any way, would love to do it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. And thank you to all our listeners. Please do subscribe to the Private Equity Podcast, and you'll be notified of the next one that comes out every single week. But till the next time, keep smashing it. And thank you very much for listening.